The Only Road, Chapter 13. The train lurched and rattled as it pulled out of the rail yard. There were no seats to fall off, but everyone still bumped into one another as the train was set in motion. "Help! Help! Get us out of here!" Two people screamed and banged on the locked sliding door. The children who had been in the van with their mama started crying again. "Shut up, fools! Do you want to get us all deported?" warned a voice low and deep in the car. Jaime recognized the voice as the man with the bandana. The children and one of the other voices quieted down. The other man continued his hysteria. "I don't care. Anything is better than dying here." The sound of a body being knocked into the metal wall shook the whole car. There was a whimper, and the deep bandana voice once again cautioned, "The more you scream, the more oxygen you're using, and the quicker we all die. Everyone shut up." No one said anything, but a murmur passed through the car. This was it. This would be how they ended their journey. So much for the first-class cabin with comfy seats and AC. They were no better off than cattle going off to be slaughtered. Except maybe cattle cars had more ventilation. Jaime wondered how long they had, how much oxygen was left in the car. If only Miguel were here. He was the one good at math and science. He would know how much time they had left. Not that it mattered. Jaime supposed as he shifted his backpack to a more comfortable position and leaned into Angela. The lurching of the train was surprisingly soothing. If they had 10 minutes or 10 hours, dead was dead. Jaime woke up slowly. Information entered his brain in incoherent bursts. Math, his sketchbook, the smell of dog, gunshots, a rocking motion, dead. For a few moments he wondered if this was what it was like to find himself in heaven. He tried to look around but couldn't see anything. Then he opened his eyes. The freight car was dark, but it wasn't pitch black anymore. He could just make out shapes and mounds of people, but nothing that would identify one from the other. He knew Angela was still next to him only because he would have felt her move if she had. A few pin-pricked holes where rust had eaten away the metal sprinkled the car with sunlight like a disco ball. A thin gap between the floor and the sliding metal door also provided faint light from under the train. The ventilation these holes provided was minimal, and with all the people crammed inside, it was stuffy. The rising heat in the car didn't help. Jaime shifted and rotated his stiff neck. Just above his head was one of the pinprick ventilation holes. He raised himself to kneeling to peer out. Between the tiny hole and the speed of the train, he could see nothing but rushing shades of green with an occasional bit of gray. Squinting through such a tiny hole gave him a headache, and he raised his nose to the opening instead. A tiny stream of fresh air tickled him, and he had to turn away to keep from sneezing. Next to him, the bundle that was Angela moved her head from one side to the other, but didn't wake up. His stomach grumbled, but he ignored it. Better wait until Angela awoke and they could eat together. Thank goodness they still had a couple tamales and mangoes that Abuela had packed for them. He settled back down against the metal frame and pulled out his sketchbook and one of his remaining good pencils. He opened the book toward the back, where he knew there were blank pages. He couldn't see the paper, much less the lead lines, but it was an experiment, a new stretch of his artistic abilities. Besides, there was nothing else to do aboard the train. In his mind, he imagined what each gesture of the pencil created on the page, and a couple times turned the pencil over to erase what he'd drawn or thought he'd drawn. He could only go by feel and sense, and more than anything, guess. Still, he enjoyed the challenge of his new drawing style. It made him pay attention to his sketch in new ways. If he ever saw sunlight again, he'd be interested to see how it had all turned out, how abstract it would be. The drawing of people huddled and trapped in a dark train car with nothing but minuscule disco lights to ventilate and show the way. He was just adding texture to what he hoped were the ridges of the metal walls above the huddled bundles when someone made the first comment of the morning. "Mama, I need to go pee-pee," said one of the children, the girl. Everyone began shuffling, waking those who were asleep. People stood and ran their hands along the walls as if searching for some compartment no one had found yet. Of course, there was nothing. Padre Kevin had said there were no toilets, had insisted several times that they use the bathroom before boarding the train. Other than the strip where the door didn't quite reach the floor, there were no holes by their feet. "Can you hold it?" the mama said. "No." "Then go along that crack by the door. We could be here for a while." People shifted again, and those who had been strategically placed near the opening grumbled at having to give up their prime airy real estate. "Great, now any fresh air we get will reek of urine," vibrated the deep bandana voice from last night. It didn't, at least not right away. Jaime and Angela got through a shared tamale and mango, eating the peel and sucking the juice from the large center stone, which kept the stuffy air pleasant instead of foul. Someone on the train ate an orange, another some kind of cured meat like chorizo. "Excuse me, señor," the little girl tapped Jaime on the leg. "Can we have the mango once you're done?" It felt like a stone the size of the mango's center lodged in Jaime's throat. There was no juice left on their mango. He and Miguel used to compete to see who could leave a mango stone drier. Jaime usually won. Except now. This nenita obviously needed that extra juice more than he did. "This banana leaf has some masa stuck on it. You can have that, mamita." Angela offered their tamale wrapper, and then, as an afterthought, one of Abuela's tortillas. "You might as well take the rest of this orange too," grumbled the bandana man. "It's too sour for my taste." A few other people offered to share what little food they had with the children. Their mama kept thanking and blessing everyone. It was hard to tell with the minimal light, but Jaime was pretty sure she didn't take any food for herself. "Oi," Jaime spoke in a more optimistic, cheery tone than he felt as an attempt to distract them from their hunger. "Do you know this tongue twister? I bet you can't say it really fast. Un tigre, dos tigre, tres tigre. Try it." The two children, and then soon the whole train, joined in with the tongue twisters. The little girl Eva was particularly good, while her older brother Ivan kept laughing, trying to say "pancha plancha con cuatro planchas." The tongue twisters lightened the mood until the train abruptly stopped. Everyone turned to stare at the door, waiting to see if it would open. It didn't, and after a while the train lunged back into motion, making its way north and west. Everyone in their car let out a massive sigh of disappointment the door hadn't opened, of relief that they hadn't been caught. This happened again the next time the train stopped, and again, until Jaime lost count of how many stops they'd made. A couple times Jaime thought of Xavi, Rafa, and Joaquin, as well as some of the other boys who'd played football with them, wondering where they were and if they were okay. Back in the train yard, he prayed for Miguel's protection. He didn't know if he was allowed to ask Miguel to look out for their friends as well. It couldn't hurt. "Do you remember the time Mama was cooling a hot iron on the bed?" The tongue twister for pancha plancha beat like a mantra in Jaime's already pounding head. The train car seemed to be getting hotter by the second. "She warned us to be careful." Angela let out a breath that might have been a giggle, but Miguel jumped on the bed a second later and landed smack on the hot iron. He said later that the bed looked so soft he forgot all about the warning and didn't see the iron. Jaime smiled at the thought of his cousin. Oh, Miguel. He had the burn mark for months. Angela remembered. But he still kept jumping on the bed whenever he came over. Jaime struggled to take a few deep breaths. The train car was getting stuffier. I really miss him. Me too. Angela sighed before wrapping an arm around Jaime's shoulders and planting a kiss on the back of his head, not knowing where his face was in the dark. The smell really got bad when one of the older men followed the little girl's example and used the space between the floor and the door as a bathroom as well. It didn't help that the temperature was getting hotter and soon everyone was sweating. The side walls became too hot to lean against, and everyone was forced to huddle in the middle of the car, touching the people next to them, which in turn created more body heat. The man next to Jaime smelled particularly ripe. Jaime drank some water, aware that the more he drank, the less he'd have for later, and the more likely he'd need to use the designated pee spot. Still, he drained half the bottle without realizing it. He'd never been so hot. He took off his shirt and wanted to remove his jeans, which stuck to his legs, but he didn't dare. Not when there was so much money sewed into them, not in such a dark car where he'd never be able to find them again. Keep your shoes on as well, Angela whispered in his ear so softly the people next to him wouldn't have heard. ¿Por qué? Angela hesitated as if she were looking around to see if anyone was watching and listening. Impossible to tell in the speckled darkness. It's something Cesar said at the church. If anything happens and you need to run, it's the people without shoes who are more likely to get caught. Others on the train hadn't heard Cesar's advice. Foot stench added to the bouquet of odors. Not that Jaime wanted to add to the bad smell, but it sure would feel nice to air out his feet. We don't need to worry about that in here. No one's going anywhere. Still, doesn't mean we can trust them. We don't even know what most of them look like. Jaime glanced at the closed door. When someone finally opened it, there'd be no place to run, no way to escape. But he supposed Angela had a point. It would take a few seconds to put his shoes back on, and a few seconds could make all the difference. He couldn't risk losing his shoes any more than he could risk losing his jeans. He wished he could trust these people. They were all on the same journey. They should help each other, especially seeing as they were locked in the train car together. Sure, there was a moment of bonding with the tongue twisters and giving the kids scraps of food. But when it came down to it, they were only going to look after themselves, and anything that could help them get up ahead could be used, even shoes. He used his shirt to mop the sweat from his face and then flapped it out in front of him to shift the air. It didn't do any good. The temperature of the car kept rising. It's like an oven in here. We're being cooked alive. The same voice that had complained last night started yelling and banging on the door. Once again, the train had made a stop, but there was no telling where they were. Rattles and clanks came from outside. The boxcar shifted and bumped, making the screaming people yell louder. Jaime wondered whether anyone outside could even hear them. Others joined in the banging, desperate to get anyone's attention. A few even put their mouths near the gap under the door that had become the urinal to shout. This time, the deep-voiced man didn't try to stop them. Jaime thought about joining the shouting party. More voices would make it louder, but he didn't have the energy to get up and forget about shouting. Much easier to stay in the center of the car with his shirt pressed against his face. There was still the faintest smell of home from the soap his mama used. I wonder, Jaime thought, though even that required more concentration than normal if we're in Medias Aguas. That would explain the clangs and shrieks of metal against metal if their car was being detached and reattached. Or could be monsters, he supposed. Monsters taking over the train. I wonder what they look like. With a lunge, the train was back on its way and the yellers settled down, crying and whimpering that they couldn't stand it anymore, and hoped death would come quickly. Mama, are we going to die? Asked Eva. Jaime expected her to say, of course not. Instead, the mama took a deep breath. That's up to God to decide. He chooses who joins him. But whatever happens, you're going to be in good hands, either mine or God's. She began singing some hymns. Others joined her in jagged breaths. No one seemed to have enough oxygen to carry a proper melody. Jaime reached for Angela's hand, though both of his and hers were hot and sticky. He wanted to ask her the same question the little girl had asked, but didn't want to hear the answer. The heat was so intense, like being in a car left in the hot sun and not being able to open a window. His brain was growing fuzzy and pounding with a headache. The dark shapes shifted side to side like they were on a boat instead of a train. I feel sick, he muttered to himself, but his cousin heard. Drink, eat. Angela handed him the water bottle and the last mango. You're dehydrated. He did as he was told, finishing the water and biting into the skin of the mango to suck some of the juice. The world began to make sense again. It was still stifling hot, but at least now he didn't seem so loopy and out of it. He handed the remaining mango half to his cousin. No, you eat it, she said. Jaime shook his head before realizing she couldn't see him. No, we both need it. She took it and finished it off, but left the stone with a little juice that remained for Eva and Ivan. The hymns had stopped, the effort too much in the hot, poorly ventilated air. Maybe he should pull out the sketchbook again and have another blind attempt at drawing. Except with the heat, the pages would get moist and be prone to tearing. Besides, he didn't think he could focus well enough on the pages without being able to see to make the drawings even remotely good. He would have to distract himself from the heat by thinking of other things. Are you scared to die? He asked in a whisper. He didn't have the strength to be angry or upset that their parents' sacrifice to get them out of Guatemala had been for nothing. No, Angela spoke with the same tiredness. More like disappointed. There's a lot I'd still like to do. Like what? Little things. Play the role of Julieta in front of an audience. Get old. Have children. See and eat snow. What about you? Jaime thought about it for a while. He knew he had future plans, something about art and museums and maybe university, but in the heat couldn't think of what they were. I want to see and eat snow too, but I am scared to die. You shouldn't be. Miguel wasn't. He can take care of you. Part of Jaime wanted to say he didn't need anyone to take care of him. But oh, how great it would be to see Miguel again. I wish Miguel were here. I wish we could have left before he was killed. Me too. But then Miguel would be in the oven train, cooking along with them, and Jaime didn't want that, not for his cousin who'd suffered enough anyway. He wondered how long it had taken for life to leave Miguel's body, how much pain he was in before he couldn't take it anymore. Jaime supposed if he had to choose between being beaten to death and being cooked alive, he'd rather go like this. At least on the train he wouldn't have to go through so much pain, he hoped. If I die, Angela rasped, but Jaime cut her off before she could continue. You won't. If she died, they both died. He wouldn't be able to continue without her. Angela hugged him. Even though the body heat made the temperature more unbearable, breaking away from her grasp was the last thing on his mind. It was several minutes before she seemed to gain enough strength or breath to continue. If I die, at least I'm with family and not alone. Neither said anything else, but they both thought it. Miguel had died alone.